All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining me. We'll go ahead and get started here. If you got your questions, go ahead and post them. Should be below the video if you're on a larger screen, or to the right of the video, or sorry, below the video if you're on a smaller screen, to the right of the video if you're on a larger screen like a computer. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. First question is from Matt. It says, can you discuss left arm pronation and backswing? I'm having trouble keeping club close, with ultimately results in lifting the club late in backswing and getting across the line at the top. Thanks. Yeah, so a couple things to unpack there. So first of all, for those of you who aren't familiar with what pronation is, it basically means inward rotation. So if we look at my forearm here, if I hold my elbow to my side and I turn my arm like this, so I'm turning it inwardly, that's pronation, right? If I do outwardly, that's supination or supination or however you want to say it. But this is pronation. So when we bring the club back in the backswing with our lead arm, there's going to be some amount of pronation, right? Because if we didn't, then the golf swing would look like this, right? So we have to rotate our forearms to get that club in a better spot as we go up to the top. Now, what it sounds like Matt is talking about is he might be having some early forearm pronate, too much pronation or rotation of the forearm early in the backswing, and that can lead to that across the line look, right? Now, again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We'll talk about why that is here in a minute, but it can lead to that. Oops. Right? So let me show you what I mean here. So if I have early forearm rotation, well, look what happens. That club gets inside a little bit, and then basically I run out of how much I can rotate my forearms. So what happens is I'll get here, and then when I get up to the top, the club gets across. Well, when the club gets across the line at the top, meaning that it's kind of pointing that way to left of the target for a right-handed golfer, this would be laid off. This would be across. This would be, I would say, in line with the target there. If the club gets like this too much, when you bring it down, that club can start down steep, right? And when the club starts down steep, you may end up coming over the top. You may end up standing up to get that club shallowing out. That's typically what we see in, middle to, higher single-digit handicap golfers, where we get the stand-up move. Also, what can happen is if you have a long enough swing, you have plenty of enough time to get that club shot out. There's lots of tour players there across the line. John Daly's across the line, right? Top of the swing, he's like this, and when he brings it back down, he's in a great spot. So I wouldn't recommend worrying about this, right? Unless the across the line is actually causing you to go steep. If you have a shorter swing, right? So if, let's say, you're here, right? You're only bringing the club up to about right here, and you're across the line like that. Well, when you bring that club down, I mean, there's just not enough time to get it to shallow out and to be in a good spot early in the swing. But if you have a longer swing, you have time to do that. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to. It just means that you have time to do that. So yeah, that, like I said, there's a lot to unpack there. So what I would work, if you're someone who's in that situation where you're early rolling it in too much, too early, and then you get across, and then you start down steep, stand up out of it, or start down steep and come over the top. And then what I would do is I'd work on trying to hold off on that pronation, that inward rotation of the rotating of the forearms. Hold off on your forearm rotation until you get up to the top of the swing. Try to hold up on that as much as possible. So instead of this, right, so I'm rotating my forearms in, what I feel like is in the beginning of the swing is basically no forearm rotation, right? And I would actually get to where now from here to the top, now I'm going to do my forearm rotation, right? So I'm lead arm parallel. I would almost feel like I've done no forearm rotation. And then from there, now I'm going to do my forearm rotation. And I'm going to feel like I have the club really, really laid off. So I just feel like you do it very, very late and go slow with it. You have to train something. You have to go really slow, right? And I just put in your reps in every day with it, right? Just work on making practice swings, right? I'm bringing it back nice and slow. No forearm rotation. I'm going to wait till I get to about right here, lean on parallel. This is an exaggeration, right? I'm going to wait till I get to about right there. Then I'm going to rotate it, and then I'm going to come down. You can just start doing that really, really slow and then build up the speed faster and faster and faster, exaggerating it, get to where you add the golf ball, get to where, you know, maybe you're doing pausing swings at the top, getting in that position, then coming down, right? So we have to understand, why are we doing that, right? Well, we're doing that to help get the club in a better position, shallowing out in the start of the downswing. If it's not helping you do that, then it's not worth doing it, right? So you have to look at that with the end. That's the end goal in sight, is to get the club to be working down. Because like I said, rolling the club inside, going across the line, these are not things that are inherently bad. It's all about how you personally react to them. Not everyone's going to react to them the same way. Raymond Floyd, same thing. He brought the club inside, rolled the club inside. He brought it up like this. He basically kind of held it there, right? He didn't go across the line. He just kind of held it there, and then he brought it down, right? So that's how he managed it. He managed it in a way that made it to where it worked, right? So it's all about how you're managing it. So you can do what you're talking about. There's lots of ways to tackle what you're talking about as well. I think the way that I talked about early, where I'm just saying, okay, I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to do the forearm rotation late. I think that's easier because you're changing something that's happening early in the swing, and it's having kind of a trickle down effect to the other parts of your swing. And it's happening early in the swing when things are moving slower. It's much easier to change things like when things are moving slower, right? You know, the easiest thing to change in your golf swing is your setup, right? Because nothing's moving. You just set up differently, right? The second easiest thing to change in your golf swing is going to be like the takeaway, right? How you bring the club back initially, right? The third easiest is going to be, it's all about, the hardest thing to change is when it's happening right at impact. That's the hardest thing to change, right? So I would work toward, if I can do something that's easier to change, right? That's what I would go with first. Unfortunately, there's not really something likely in your setup that you're going to be able to change. It's going to make you start bringing your arms back differently. But if you're someone who's struggling with that, that's how I'd recommend working on it. All right, let's keep going. Sorry, I lost my spot here. All right, so Jim S says, could wind misjudgment be the main source of most amateurs under clubbing? And in the golf grip, the left hand can be gripped under. Okay, so let's answer the first one first. In my opinion, wind is probably not the number one thing. I would say the main thing is just poor contact, either not hitting the ball in the middle of the face. Actually, I take that back. There's a couple things that are going on here. I would say wind is probably at the back of my list. Although I do think that some players do misjudge the wind. I mean, that definitely happens. I'm a culprit of that myself. But I wouldn't say it could be a reason for a miss, but it's not the main reason for a miss. I would say the two main reasons for under clubbing would be, one, you're under clubbing because you can't hit the ball that far, right? I think they did some sort of poll or something like that, and where they asked golfers how far they hit their clubs, and then had them get on TrackMan and see how far they hit their clubs. It's like 85% say they hit the ball way farther than what they actually do, right? So I would say that that's part of it, right? We have to know exactly how far we really hit the clubs, not how far you hit the club one time, downwind, elevation change, that sort of thing. How far you actually hit your clubs, right? So that would be kind of the first thing, is that amateurs don't know how far they actually hit their clubs. They just know that they hit their 9-iron one time 160 yards. So whenever they're 160 yards, they always hit their 9-iron, and most of the time they end up coming short. So I would say that's a big part of it. And then the other part of it is just poor contact, right? I don't know how many times, we've had, I don't know if you familiar with our ball striking masterclass, it's a course that we have. But one thing that we do in the very beginning is we get a baseline of your strike location, how well you do at hitting the ball in the middle of the face. And I'll see golfers that they'll do the test, right? They'll use the foot power spray or whatever, and then they see that they're hitting it on the heel like every time, and they had no idea. They just that's just where they always hit it on the face, so they don't know any different, right? So if that's happening, you're definitely losing distance if that's happening, right? Because you're, for several reasons. One, when you hit the ball on the heel, you're not transferring as much energy to the ball because there's less speed on the heel. And also, the face is going to twist when you hit it on the heel, and then it's going to transfer less energy to the ball. So that could be a big part of it as well. Just poor strikes on the face, hitting it a little bit chunky, right? Hitting it a little bit thin, hitting it on the toe, on the heel. Those would be the other things. Wind, wind sometimes plays a role in that, right? But I would say that wouldn't be the number one thing on my list. All right, let's keep going. Oh, yeah. So you have more there. It said, and in the golf grip, the left hand can be gripped under the heel of the hand in several different places. Right at the bone or at the heel, down in the fingers of the hand. Where is a good guide? One produces more to the right shots, and in the fingers produces more of a flippy wrist action. So really with the grip with the left hand, there's really only, I'm not sure what you mean by at the bone of the heel to the fingers in the hand. So really, a good way to kind of get a feel for where you should hold it would be just to hold it like this. Just have your pointer finger have like that, and then get your heel pad on top of it, right? That's basically where it should be in your hand, right? You should be able to do that, right? So if you don't have it underneath your heel pad enough, well, it's just not going to stay there in your hand, right? So that's how you want to hold it in your left hand, and that's whether you have a strong or weak grip, right? If I have a weaker grip, right, my hand's going to be more on the side. I'm going to be more like this. If I have a stronger grip, it's going to be more on top, right? It's going to be more like that. So, yeah, it's going to be held pretty much in the same spot on your lead hand. The right hand, there could be some differences there, but the left hand, I would say it's going to be held in that same spot. Where is a good guide? One produces more to the right shots, and the fingers produces more flippy wrist action. Okay, I don't know quite what you mean, but if you miss shots to the right, most likely the face is too open, so you need a stronger grip. What I would recommend that you do is you work through the 20-minute shallowing fix, because that helps you to get that grip strong enough, so that way you're not losing shots to the right. So to get to that course, click the instruction tab, and then click the 20-minute shallowing fix from there. All right, let's keep going. Eddie says, hi, Q. I'm struggling hitting driver into a strong wind. You and everybody else, man. I'm trying to move the ball back with the idea of hitting a low running hook draw. I miss hitting the ball dead left most of the time. What is the right way to approach this challenge? So if you're hitting the ball into the wind, the most important thing is to hit the ball in the middle of the face. That's really the most important thing. You're going to hit even if you hit a high ball, you still hit your high launch, low spin kind of shot, it's still going to go plenty of distance as long as you hit it solidly. So if your adjustments are making you hit the ball poorly, those are not the right adjustments, right? You want to make whenever I'm hitting a ball into the wind, what I'll do is I'll play the ball slightly back, right? Back of where I normally do. So where I normally would play my driver is about off my lead shoulder. That's going to promote a more upward angle of attack and allow me to hit the ball high, low spin. Now you can still hit that shot into the wind and it'll go plenty far as long as you hit it solidly. But I find for myself that if I hit that kind of shot into the wind, it's harder to be accurate with it, because the more the ball is up in the air, the more the wind can affect it, right? So I like to keep the ball a little bit lower hitting into the wind, just because I feel like it gives me more control. It's not necessarily going to go farther, right? But it's going to give more control over what you're doing. So What I do when I'm hitting into the wind, what I'll do is I'll play the ball a little bit back of where that is, so that way I can come in more level on the ball. When I have it off of my lead shoulder, that's to promote a little bit of an upward angle of attack. I'm trying to hit 3-5 degrees up on it. I'll move the ball maybe a ball and a half back of that to get to where maybe I'm hitting 1 degree up on it, right? Or very level on it. I don't really want to hit down on it because that may make me produce more spin, and I don't want to produce more spin into the wind. I want to come in pretty level with it, and I really just want to do the same thing with my spin. I just want to have it going lower, right? And the way that I'm getting it to go lower is by not hitting up on it as much. I'm swinging more level with it. All right. So again, I'm going to hit it. I'm going to have it a little bit more back. And I'm also going to tee it a hair lower, right? Because remember, I'm not hitting up on it as much now, or I'm hitting very level on it. I'm going to tee it a little bit lower. That's also going to help get the strike, make sure that it's kind of more in the middle of the face instead of higher on the face. When I try to hit high launching drives, I'm okay with it hitting a little bit higher on the face because that's just going to make it go higher with less spin. But I don't want that into the wind. I want it to be low, right? Because that's going to help me to control it the most. So I'll tee it a little bit lower, not only because I want to make that strike be more in the middle of the face, and also because I'm not hitting up on it as much. I'm swinging more level with it, right? And then from there, I'm just making the same swing. And really, I would put more of an emphasis on making sure you're hitting it in the middle of the face. The biggest mistake that I see people make when they're trying to hit these drives into the wind, what they do is they try to overpower the wind. You're not going to beat the wind. When you try to overpower the wind, it's going to tend to lead to missed strikes. If anything, when you're hitting into the wind, I would almost swing as much within your control and within yourself as you can. Make whatever swing you have to make to be that's going to allow you to get that strike in the middle of the face. That's the most important thing, because if you miss hit it, the wind is just going to multiply whatever mistake you made, right? So if you miss hit it, that miss hit is going to add spin, and it's also going to make the ball go offline, and the wind is just going to gobble that up, right? So you'll be much better off making a swing at 90. And also, here's something that I've tested as well. Your really aggressive swing really isn't that much faster than your easy swing. It's maybe 4 or 5 miles an hour faster, maybe. So it's like a 95 to 100 difference, and sometimes it's not even that much, right? So you're not really losing that much by making sure that you're swinging within yourself and making sure you get that strike in the middle of the face. That's really the key to hitting it in the wind. So Eddie, another question says, what is the right way to drive with lateral water hazard? Aim inside of it and curve away, or aim to the other side of the fairway and curve back towards it? You want to start the ball away from it, ideally. Now, so here's what it comes down to as well. If you're good at working the ball both ways, meaning you're just as good at hitting a draw as a fade and vice versa, right? You're just as good, then start it away from the water and work it back toward the water, right? So if you have water on the right-hand side and you are just as good at hitting fades as you are hitting draws, I would hit a fade that starts at the left side of the fairway and then fades back toward the middle of the fairway, right? Especially if left is fine, right? You want to start the ball away from it, because if you start the ball at it, then you're relying on it to curve, right? And if it doesn't curve, you're in the water. You're dead in the water for lack of a better term there, right? You're dead in the water. So yeah, you don't really want to start it at the water. Now, let's say you fade the ball terribly, right? And a lot of times maybe when you try to hit a fade, it ends up being a huge slice, right? But let's say that you're old reliable with that draw, right? And that's your bread and butter. Well, then hit that draw, right? maybe start it at the middle of the fairway and let it draw into the left side of the fairway. And if you overdraw it, then you're just in the rough on the left-hand side, no big deal. If it doesn't draw, then you're just in the middle of the fairway. If you double cross it a little bit and it fades a hair, you're probably still going to be just fine, right? The only way that ball is going in the water is if it ends up. You just don't want to start it at the water. Unless you're just so confident in the shot, right? I really don't recommend starting the ball at hazards and relying on it to where it's going to go in that hazard if it doesn't curve. I don't really recommend that. That's a dangerous way to live. You're asking for a lot of penalty strokes if you do that. So some of it, on the shot that you kind of hit, a lot of it depends on your game, your personal game, right? So me personally, I'm not a big fan of working the ball both ways with the driver, especially. So I kind of stick to one shot shape with the driver for the most part, and that's what's most reliable for me. I don't have big confidence curving it both ways with my driver. I have a little bit more confidence with the irons, but with the driver, I don't have a ton of confidence working it both ways. So I tend to stick with one shot shape. So I'm not going to start it at a hazard, but in that situation, I probably just go for my normal shot shape. All right, so G McNamara says, is there a recommended order for the lessons? I'm going back through the lessons, and after stable fluid spine, I moved to straight line release. First video there referred to that I should have a good lag now, and I'll find out how to release. Does that mean I should have done lag course next? Yes. So the order of the courses is stable fluid spine, power turn, lag, compression line, release. The straight line release is the last piece of the system, and really all the other ones are kind of a prerequisite for the straight line release. So there's two ways you can work through the system, right? Number one is to work through each level within each piece of the Totsky Golf system. So for example, that would look like, okay, I'm going to do stable fluid spine, level 1, level 2, level 3. Now I'm going to go to power turn, level 1, level 2, level 3. Lag, level 1, level 2. You get the idea, right? The other way that you can do it is you can do the level 1 of each piece, because each piece has 3 levels, right? So you can do the level 1 of each piece. So you could go level 1 stable fluid spine, level 1 power turn, level 1 lag, level 1 compression line, level 1 stable fluid spine or straight line release. Then you would go back and you would do level 2 stable fluid spine, level 2 power turn, and so on and so forth, and go through all the level 2s. Then you go back stable fluid spine, do all the level 3s. So those are the 2 ways that you can work through it. Here are the mistakes that I see some people make. One is they try to do multiple pieces of the system at the same time. Do not do that. Put all your reps in, all your eggs in one basket of working on the system. There's plenty of other things you can work on. If you have extra time, you can do the putting system. You can do the chipping mastery course. You can do the wedge system. There's other areas of your game that you can work on. I don't recommend trying to do the lag and the power turn at the same time. The main reasons are, like I said, you might be running into like a prerequisite situation, like it sounds like you ran into, where you were assuming, oh, you have lag now because you did the lag course, right? That's part of it. And then the other part of it is when you're working on multiple things at one time in your full swing, what tends to happen is we'll get somewhere where we're working on something. It will reach a point where we kind of hit a wall. This happens to everybody, right? Where you're making progress, and then you kind of hit a wall where you're not making much progress, or you're making very minimal progress, or whatever it might be. And a lot of times when that happens, you'll just switch to the other thing because I have this other thing I can work on because I'm in a wall here. And then you never actually like get in there and try to get through the problem, right? You just jump to the other thing, and then you run into a wall there, and you jump back, and then you just kind of end up jumping back and forth, and you end up spending a lot of time working really hard, but you don't really get much done, right? So that's why I recommend working on one piece, because if you're having trouble, let's say you're in the level 1 lag and you're having trouble with it, right? You're going to break through it, right? You're going to work hard until you break through it. You're going to try different things until you get through it. Whereas if you just have another thing, well, you'll just go to that other thing and then end up going back and forth. So I don't recommend doing that. Now, here's the other thing that I recommend that you do. I would watch the first video of each course, so that way you have an understanding of what it is. Look at your video, look at your swing video. And if you're already doing what we're trying to get you to do, right, then working through those drills is kind of redundant, right? So let's say you get in the power turn course, right, and your shoulder turn is already, you're like Dustin Johnson at the top of the swing, right? You have a 120-degree shoulder turn. Well, it wouldn't really make sense for you to work through the power turn course, right? Because you're already doing it, right? It would be redundant, right? Just like it would be redundant for pretty much all tour players to work through the top speed golf system, because they're all doing it, right? The top speed golf system is all the things that we see the best golfers in the world doing, right? So it would be redundant. So I know it seems like, man, I'm going to have to do thousands, 100,000 reps or whatever. The reality is that most likely you're probably doing 2 or 3 pieces of the system pretty well. Or you're doing, maybe the, lag level 1 and level 2, you're doing really well already, but level 3, not so good. Right. So that's why I'm saying, like, as you're going through it, if you're looking at yourself on video and you're like, oh, I'm already passing the test, what Clay's talking about, because at the end of every level, there's a test, right? If you're already passing the test on video, you don't need to go through it. So that allows you to, work through it a little bit faster. The better swing you have, the less you're gonna have to work through it. It makes sense, right? All right, let's keep going. So Gary C says, squat move. What would be the downsides of starting the squat position as opposed to squatting some arbitrary amount during the swing? Hold on. What would be the downside of starting in the squat position as opposed to? You wouldn't be able to move very well, right? So if you were to kind of set up like this, well, most likely you're going to stand up out of it. I don't really see any good golfers that start in a squatted position, go up to the top, and then get back down in a good position, right? That squat move happens in the start of the downswing, right? So the downside would be you just wouldn't be able to move very athletically. You wouldn't be able to turn very well, right? So just start in an athletic position, right? Start in an athletic position and you'll be able to move athletically, and then that will set you up to more easily do the squat move. Usually people who do the squat move in the address or do the squat move in the backswing tend to stand up in the downswing, and that's the whole thing you're trying to avoid, right? You want to do that squat move in the start of the downswing. That's when that's happening. That's when the hips and the knees are going to be flexing the most in that start of the downswing. From the top of the swing to that lead arm parallel position in the downswing, that's when that's starting. So if you start out that way, odds are you're not going to get there. It's going to be very, very difficult. All right. So Derek S says, hello, Quentin. At club parallel in the backswing, should the club head be in front of or behind the hands, or are both correct? Either one of them can be fine, right? So he's talking about at club parallel and backswing. So right here, right? This can be fine. This can be fine. That can be fine. All of those can be fine. It's all about how you manage it. We talked about this earlier in the beginning of the office hours where somebody asked about pronation of the left arm, right? So for right-handed golfer, the lead arm, left arm, pronating, that's inwardly rotated, right? So if I kind of isolate that and I rotate too much early, well, then that club's going to tend to get inside early, right? And my face is going to tend to get open early, right? Well, if I do that, what a lot of golfers will end up doing, and it sounds like this is what's happening with the fellow that asked a question earlier, club gets inside, then it gets across at the top, then it starts down steep, then we stand up to shallow it out. Then because we stood up, we're going to flip our hands and we're going to have a harder time being consistent, right? That's a very, very common thing. So if you're someone in that situation, I would work on this. So this is the biggest issue and one of my biggest pet peeves with, not saying that this is what you're doing, um, Derek, who asked the question, not saying this is what you're doing, but what I see a lot of people do is I see people work on their takeaway just to get it into a position, right? But what we have to understand is that if you're changing your swing, it has to be to improve your ball flight and contact. It has to, right? So you have to have an understanding of, okay, why am I changing my takeaway? What is it actually going to do, right? So the breakdown is, for a lot of golfers that bring the club inside the hands too much, right? Is that the early forearm rotation, too much forearm rotation early, so too much left arm pronation early leads to the club getting inside, which can lead, doesn't mean it will lead, but can lead to the club getting across the top. When the club is across the top, that can lead, it doesn't mean it will lead, it can lead to starting down steep in the start of the downswing, and then that often leads to either continuing to come down steep and over the top, or we'll stand up, right, to get that club shallowed out inside the hands. When we stand up, we're going to flip the hands to square up the face, right, and to get to the golf ball, right? So if you're in that situation, it could be beneficial to work on, okay, I want to get that club going a little bit more outside my hands, going back. So no forearm rotation to this point. And then I want to feel forearm rotation as I get up to the top. And now look where I have the club. I have the club. It's, basically in a laid off position now that may make it easier for me to get it shallowed out and start the downswing. Doesn't mean it will. It just means that could be a route that you take. So you got to be careful when you're just looking at positions, right? Because you look at what Tiger's doing and look at what you're doing. Well, it's all about how you're managing the club, right? What you do, what I have found is that what most golfers do in the start of the downswing is a reaction to where the club is and the direction this club face is pointing, right? So if I have a very open face at the top of the swing, I may swing to the left in an effort to get my club face to be pointing more toward the target. Because if I were to swing from the inside and shallow it out, my club face is pointing to right of the target. So I can swing left as a reaction to that. Very, very common, right? If the club gets across the line at the top, right, and it starts down steep, well, a reaction to that could be standing up to get the club shallowing out. Now I've got that club shallowing out, but I've had to stand up to do it. If I stand up, I'm going to tend to release it early, right? So you have to look at, I beg you, don't just work on your takeaway to work on your takeaway, because what's going to end up happening is you may be able to get your takeaway in a position that looks like Tiger or looks like whoever you're trying to model after, but then you just do the same exact thing at the top, right? So let's say you bring it here, you get in a good spot, but then at the top you still get across the line. You still move the club into position because that's the position that you're used to getting to, right? So, odds are that's probably what's going to happen. So you have to understand, okay, I'm working on my takeaway so that this doesn't happen, so that this doesn't happen, the down the line chain, that doesn't happen, right? I'm bringing the club here now, so that way I can get it there, so that way I can get it there and stay in my posture, and now I'm not going to have to stand up and flip the club, right? So either can be correct, right? There's players that have it way out like this, right? And there's players that have it in, there's players that have it in line. You have to play around with what works best for you. So what I would look at is how the club is working down to the ball, and look at the chain. If it's not moving down to the ball the way that you want to, and a way that you can look at this is by using the elbow plane line. You can check this on your swing. Now, the most critical thing with checking this is making sure that the camera is in the right position, because if it's not, then it's going to give you bad information, right? So in order to get good information from your camera, you have to set it up correctly. Use an alignment stick, place it on the ground, point it at a target. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my camera and I'm going to line it up with that alignment stick as if there's a laser coming out of my camera it's going right through that stick. I want to have it at hip level, right? Hip height. And then I want to have it far away enough to where me and the club stay in the frame throughout the entire swing. Err on the side of being too far away, right? So this camera angle here actually is not good. It's too close. It's too high, right? It's probably not quite set up perfectly down the alignment stick. So it wouldn't quite be the correct camera angle. So now, once I go to set up, this is the other thing that people get wrong. And I only know this because I do online lessons and I have people send me videos. And this is something they get wrong all the time. They'll get the camera set up in line with it, but then when they go to hit the ball, they'll be like this. The whole point of having the stick here is so that way we know where to put our toes. You need to have your toes within an inch or two of that stick, right? When you get the camera lined up with it. That's what's going to give you the best camera angle, right? So now once we have that, what we want to do is we want to draw a line from the ball up through the middle of the elbow. This is the elbow plane line. Clay's called it the shallowing line. There's all kinds of things you can call it. I like to call it the elbow plane line because it goes through the elbow. All right. So middle of the ball, middle of the elbow. What we want to see is we want to see the club getting underneath that line very early in the start of the downswing. The earlier, the better. Right. So it gets underneath that line in the start of the downswing. Right. And then we also want to see those hands working toward that elbow plane line and getting on that elbow plane line eventually. Right. So by halfway down, I want it on the elbow plane line. I want the club underneath it. Right. And then as we come into contact, the hands will actually move underneath that elbow plane line. Usually will work underneath the elbow plane line. And then the club head will be on the elbow plane line because it's hitting the ball. Right. That's how you can see how the club's working down. So if you look at your video and you see that club head is working out above that line, you're coming down steep. Right. If you see that your hands are working out above that line, you're coming down steep. And or you might be standing up. So you might get that club working underneath the elbow plane line, but the hands are way above it because you're standing up and coming in like this. Right. So that's how you know if you're coming on there. So if the club's not coming on there right, then I would work on the 20-minute shallowing fix. That's what I would start out with. And that will more than likely help you get that club working the right way. All right, let's keep going. So LL says, I have a tendency to hit thin bunker shots on the course. I work on this at least twice a week. Yeah, you're just hitting too close to the ball. So what I would do is I would do the bunker drill where you draw a line about 4 to 6 inches behind the ball, and you work on hitting that line, before the ball. That's what I'd recommend doing. You might have the ball position too far back in the stance, right? So where you're hitting the sand, that should be about the middle of your stance, and the ball should be about 4 or 6 inches ahead of that. So when you're drawing that line in the sand, that line in the sand should be in the middle of your stance, right? And you want to work on hitting that line. So Nick B says, hi Q, I recently increased my driver max swing speed about 10 miles per hour from 92 to 102. I'm having a bit of a hard time controlling the club face and found I really have to slow down to hit it straight. Is it possible I need to upgrade my shaft stiffness from regular stiff? And if I'm planning to continue to increase my swing speed, should I be potentially updating to extra stiff? It's possible, but the only way to know for sure is to get professionally fitted. One thing I will say is that, your max speed is 102 miles an hour. Your max speed is not necessarily the speed that you're taking to the course. That's what we have to understand is that when you do the 20-minute distance fix, we're asking you to swing with 100% effort. That is not what you're doing on the course, right? On the course, you're swinging with whatever max swing speed you can swing with to control your strike and be able to control to be able to hit the ball somewhat accurately, right? So that's, you kind of have to play around with what that looks like to you. So me personally, I've done the 20-minute distance fix. I went through it for a month, right? I went from 110 to 123. My max speed was 123, right? So this was everything I got swinging out of my shoes. I'm pretty sure it was like a snap hook, right? It wasn't like a beautiful looking golf swing, right? but it was my max speed, right? Well, as my max speed went up to 123 miles an hour, my playing speed went up to like 117, 118. So that 117, 118 club head speed swing that I measured on the course, I brought my PRGR with me and I set it down just to kind of see where I was at on the course because I knew I was hitting the ball farther. I was in different places on holes that I hadn't been before, right? And it was 117, 118 when I believe I was like 110 before, which makes sense because if you gain 7-8 miles an hour, that's 20 yards ish that you're gaining off the tee, right? So and that's basically about what it was, right? So yeah, that 117, 118 felt the same as the 110. It felt the same. It didn't feel like I was putting out any more effort than I was before. But because I had done the speed training and I'd swung so many times, putting out all out effort, my it's called neural adaptation. Clay talks about this in the 20-minute distance fix. And the neural adaptation basically meaning my neurological system had adapted to the new stimulus that I provided, swinging with a lot of effort, that led to gaining more speed. So when you're out on the course, you're not going all out 100% effort like your speed training. You're swinging with the swing speed that you're able to control, right? So that would be another piece of advice. It's possible you may benefit from having different shafts, right? That could be too whippy now and too hard to control. But I wish I could just tell you, oh yeah, you gain 10 miles an hour, you gotta get new clubs. Doesn't work that way. The only way to really know is to get professionally fitted. And that would be the last question would be a good question for them to say, okay, I'm going to continue to do speed training. I'm going to be swinging. I want to be swinging this fast or whatever. I'm going to be training. Then they might say, okay, well, you might want to go up to an extra stiff. Maybe. I don't really know for sure. Club fitting is not really my area of expertise, but it's possible that they may say that. I will also say that first 10 miles an hour, that's the easiest to gain, right? So every mile per hour after that's going to be tougher. So it's not like you're going to work on it some more and you're just going to go jump up to 112. It's going to take you way more work. If you can get to 112, it's going to take you way more work to get to 112, most likely anyway, than it did for you to go from 92 to 102. It's going to take a lot more work to go from 102 to 112, just because that's the way it goes. Usually the first 10 miles an hour are the easiest to get. And the reason is that you most likely had some low hanging fruit things, like maybe you weren't turning very much. Maybe you weren't pushing to the ground at all, right? There's some low hanging fruit things that you may have found that got you speed pretty quick. And now you're kind of running out of those low hanging fruit things. And, you're going to gain a mile per hour here, a mile per hour there, a mile per hour, you're going to gain a new mile per hour, every now and then, as opposed to, gaining several every time you go and practice. All right, let's keep going. So Ron M says, hey, Q, how many students do you work with at a time your unlimited swing review group? I know you have limited amount of space. Yeah, I'm not going to disclose that on here. But I work with the amount of students that I make sure that I can get to everybody. There's certain times of the year, I try to reduce my student load, and because I know I'm going to be busy with other things. So it's not always the same. So yeah, but I don't disclose how many students I have. So W.S. Davis says, why do so many pros get fades instead of draws? That's a good question. So to not get too, scientific-y with it, the main thing is that it's easier to kind of hold off the face for a lot of golfers as opposed to letting the face kind of turn over, right? So a lot of the golfers that kind of hit the fades are basically they're kind of holding the face through contact, right? So instead of kind of letting the natural momentum of the club go, they're kind of holding that face and continuing to turn through contact. And generally that's easier to control for a lot of golfers. The other thing is that if you have a lot of shaft lean, which a lot of pros have, so a lot of the pros that do hit fades have a lot of shaft lean. So Dustin Johnson, for example, if you look at Dustin Johnson at Impact, I mean, that guy has a ton of shaft lean. So when you have a ton of shaft lean, a lot of times fades are a way to hit the ball higher, right? So when you have a lot of shaft lean, the ball is going to tend to go lower. And if you hit a draw, it's going to go even lower, right? So the reason is that a draw, in order to hit a draw, what do you have to do, right? You have to close the face to the path. When you close the face to the path, that de-lofts the face. And when you de-loft the face, it's going to go lower. So when you already have a lot of shaft lean de-lofting the face, and then you hit draws, that's de-lofting the face more, right? It's hard to get the ball to go high, right? So a lot of times they'll hit fades, so that way their shots will land softer, right? Because a lot of times the greens that tour players play, a lot of times they can be very firm and not as receptive to low, piercing ball flight coming in, right? Unless you just have a lot of spin. Now with wedges, they'll tend to hit the wedges lower because they can get a ton of spin on them and it's easier to control, right? But if you're hitting like an 8-iron or a 7-iron or 6-iron, right, not as much loft, so not going to be as much spin, and that fade helps to get the ball up higher. Also, the fade gives it a little bit more spin because when you hit a fade, you're opening the face. When you open the face, you're going to have more spin because you're adding loft, right? So those are kind of the two main things I would say is that the way the forces are applying on the club, for some players, it's easier to hit the fade. It's more reliable for them. And then the other side of it is, the ball will go higher, right? And if you have a lot of shaft length. Now, what we have to be careful of is trying to copy what we see all the best players doing. I generally recommend, I think most recreational golfers are going to benefit from hitting draws because of the things that I mentioned, right? Most recreational golfers release the club too early, right? When you release the club too early, you're adding loft, right? So if you're coming in, your impact position is kind of like this, right? Where you have some shaft lean, right? But maybe you don't have Dustin Johnson shaft lean, right? You're like this, some shaft lean. You're going to benefit from hitting draws because it's just going to be a stronger ball flight for you. You're going to hit it farther, and you're going to be able to hit it lower, right? Which I think most golfers need to be able to do to be able to have a little bit more of a penetrating ball flight. They're going to be able to hit the ball farther with the draws. So yeah, that's why I recommend most recreational golfers hit draws. I know. Yeah, here's what I would say as well. If you're someone who hits, I'm not saying you can't hit fades. If you're someone who hits fades and you're really good at hitting fades, stick to the fades. That's totally fine. Go ahead, but you probably hit the ball farther if you hit draws. And that's why I recommend most recreational golfers hit draws. Hit mostly draws anyway. All right, let's keep going. So Harry says, the low point of my swing is often too far back away from the target. Looking at the video, my sequencing seems okay, but maybe I'm not going forward soon enough. Any ideas or drills or thoughts to address this? Harry, I'm going to put a video where I'll discuss it a little bit here, but I did a video that kind of went over how to get the low point more forward, several things, and I'll go over which each of them are, but I'm not going to go into detail with all the drills like I do in this video here. So in the chat, I just put a link to the video. If you're struggling with chunk shots, check out that video. I pretty much go everything. I see the main things that I see from my online students that struggle with chunk shots. So first and foremost, ball position. This is something that I see a lot of golfers doing. They just put the ball too far forward in the stance. So if this stick represents the middle of my stance, right? So let's say it's equally between my feet there. I like to see the ball about right there, where the back of the ball would be basically be on the middle of the stance line. That's a pretty good ball position, for pretty much any shot. Now, if I want to hit the ball a little bit higher, I could put the ball, maybe a ball forward of that. If I want to hit a little bit lower, wedges, I like to play my wedges a little bit more back so I can get them lower, right? Hit down on them more and get more spin. So I like to play them maybe a ball back of the middle of my stance. But I see a lot of people, they especially when they get the fairway woods in their hand, they push the ball position like where they play their driver. It's like it's too far forward. It's going to make it very difficult to get the bottom of the swing to be in front. Because as I believe who asked this, Harry talked about, right? The low point of the swing. What is that? Well, the low point of the swing is where the club is coming down and reaches the lowest point and then works back up. We want, when we're hitting shots off of the ground, we need to have that lowest point of the swing be on the target side of the ball. On average, your tour player is going to be 3 or 4 inches in front of the ball with the low point of the swing. That's not where they're hitting the ground, right? The low point is not where the club's hitting the ground. The club is already working. It's still working down when it hits the ground. So I'm coming in, right? Club's working down, down, down. I'm making ball and turf contact roughly at the same time. And then it's working down, down, down. I'm reaching the bottom of the swing there. Then it's going to start to work up. It's still in the ground, though. It's working up, and then it works up out of the ground, right? So that middle, typically the middle of your divot is going to be about where the low point of the swing is, right? So that's the first thing I would look at, right? The second thing I would look at is how your hips are moving, right? So what I see a lot of people do is they slide their hips away in the backswing. So I really like a move off the ball with the hips to start the backswing to get pressure in the trail foot. But as soon as we push that pressure there, we need to be pushing away from that with our trail foot and pushing our hip back and around. What we don't want to do is shift that way and just keep going and get to where we're like this, right? So if you draw a line on the outside of a tour player's hip, what you're going to see is they'll typically move into that line to start the backswing. And then as they get up to the top, they'll move away from that line because their momentum's kind of moving toward the target. A good drill to do for that is a chair drill. Take a chair, put it on the outside of your hip, nudge it to start, create the space as you go up to the top. That's talked about in that video that I mentioned. Another one is just not getting the momentum moving toward the target. So the best drill for that is the step drill. Start with your feet together, pressure in the trail foot, throw the club back. As you throw the club back, step forward as you make a full turn, right? So get the feeling of that proper step, and then you can go from there. Those are kind of the main things, I would say. Some other ones could be that you're over shallowing out the club, right? So if I swing this club too far from the inside, I'm going to tend to hit the ground behind the ball, right? So if you're in that situation, I maybe feel like you're rotating more. You're turning your body more through contact because that will neutralize your path, right? So if I'm coming in like this, right, and I'm early extending, my hips are moving toward that club can get way behind me, and then I swing too much from the inside, I can hit the ground. But if I flex my hips to start and I start rotating, well, now I'm going to rotate more, and that may neutralize my path and also get the bottom of my swing more forward. So I talk about that in that video as well. Basically just trying to feel like you're hitting like a pole, like chopping down in the ball and then toning that down. Another one is the release. And I know a lot of you are going to be thinking, oh, release, that's me, because I know 85% to 90% of recreational golfers release the club early, right? I know that, but this is not the only reason why you're chunking it. You can have an early release and still make ball first contact, right? So I don't want people to think, oh, early release, that's the last reason you're chunking it, right? All the other things are leading up to it. So as long as I have a good ball position, I'm not sliding my hips in the backswing, and I'm able to shift my weight properly to my lead side in the downswing, and I'm not over shallowing out the club, you will be able to make ball first contact even if you have an early release. The only time I would say work on your release is if you come into contact and you've made all the adjustments that I talked about, right? Your ball position is good. You're getting a good weight shift. You've done everything that I talked about. Your compression line is more vertical as you're coming into contact, right? So that means we're getting our body forward enough. So if your ball position is good, you're getting your body forward enough, you're doing all those things that I talked about, and your impact position looks like this, where you have backward shaft lean. In that situation, I would say, yeah, you need to work on just getting your hands a little bit more in front. But that'd be the only situation. And I will tell you, somebody asked how many students I've had or that I work with at a time. And again, I'm not going to disclose that, but I've worked with thousands of students, over 1,000. I wouldn't say, yeah, over 1,000 for sure. in my online lessons. And I think I've only seen, there's less than 5 for sure, golfers that have backward shaft lane of contact, meaning they're coming into contact like this. And usually the golfers that have backward shaft lane, it's because the ball position's bad or they're not shifting their weight. They're on their back foot and they're going like this, right? I don't know. Honestly, I'm not sure if I've seen any golfer who shifts their weight well and has it's like this, like they're shifted forward and then their hands are like this. I don't know that I've seen anybody like that. So get that weight shift forward, and that weight shift will also help you to get your hands forward if you shift your weight. Because if you're hanging back, if I hang back on my back foot, that's going to tend to bring my hands back too. If I get my body forward, that's going to tend to move my hands forward. All right, so Rick P says, "Hi Q, would like to show this session to my growing children. Could you recap in a couple sessions what each course is designed to teach?" Sure. So if you go to the intro video of all of these, it goes over that. So if you just go to each piece, the first video in each piece pretty much talks about it. But for the stable fluid spine, we want to have our spine angled away slightly from the target, somewhere in the 6 to 8 degree range. We want to maintain that as we go up to the top. And then as we come into impact, we're going to increase that as we shift our weight to our lead side. Not to be confused with when I see a lot of people trying to get their spine more angled away from contact, they don't shift their weight, right? They're trying to manufacture. So basically, they get up like this and then they go like this, right? That's not what we're trying to get you to do. We want you to shift your weight to your lead side, and then you're going to push your hip back and around, and that's going to get your body angled away. So that's basically what you work through in the stable fluid spine course. The other thing about the stable fluid spine is we don't want our hips sliding everywhere. So I could have my spine angled away 6 to 8 degrees and be over here, right? I'm not in the correct place, right? I don't want to have a big hip slide. I want a little move to my right side. Then I'm going to turn my hip back around and create that spine angle, right? So we don't want a big hip slide within that, right? Power turn is just about, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? In the backswing, we want to make sure that our shoulders are turning at least 90 degrees. Ideally, we would have more, but at least 90 degrees is what we want. And then we want a full follow through as well. So the power turn is not just the backswing, it's the follow through as well. So when we turn through, right, we want to get off of our trail foot. We want to get up on the toes of our trail foot. We want to get our hips pointing toward the target, chest left of the target, full finish, right? When I see a lot of recreational golfers, right, they keep that trail foot on the ground and they kind of swing through and they kind of look like this. This is going to rob you of a lot of power. We need to make sure we're shifting to the lead side and we're pushing and extending all the way through. Clay also talks about this in the power turn section. Lag is just about basically not casting in the start of the downswing. So when we get up to the top of the swing, we don't want to do that to start. That's just going to tend to lead to a lot of issues. You're going to tend to come over the top. You're going to tend to early release, scoop, and things like that. So really what it's about is about creating some angle as we start down, get that club to lag a little bit behind us. So that way we can more easily stay in our posture and release that club out in front. So that's what that one's about, just getting that lag in the start of the downswing. The compression line, fourth piece, that's the line that goes from my lead ankle, lead hip, lead shoulder. I want that to be in a straight line at impact. And for an iron, I like to see it either vertical or just a degree or two angled away. For a driver, we can be more angled away because I'm trying to hit up on the ball, right, generally. Right, so if I'm trying to hit as long a drive as I can, I'm trying to hit up on it, I may be more angled away to promote that, right? And I'm going to tend to get more wide when I do that as well. So that's really what the compression line is. We don't want to have our hip bumping out because now I'm not going to be able to, rotate my body very well. I don't want to be too far angled away with an iron because now I'm going to tend to hit behind the ball. I want to have it vertical or just slightly angled away a degree or two. And then the straight line release, that's really talking about where we're releasing the club, right? So we talked about how we want to get this club to lag. Well, once we lag it, we want to release it, right? That's how we create the power. It's like cracking a whip, right? I want to get that whip behind me, then I want to release that whip, right? So that's the same thing we want to do with the club. So when we're talking about when the club releases, that's going to be when the club is splitting my forearms. When you look at the best players, they're going to be releasing it about 45 degrees out in front. Now there's a range, right? We've measured a ton of tour players, and it's between 28 and 55 degrees is what we found, right? Is where you're going to see that club releasing. So the average is about 40, 45 degrees. That's where we want to see that club releasing out in front. So Clay walks you through drills to get that club releasing out in front, and having the proper release will result in some good shaft lean and contact. Because if I early release, right, I'm going to tend to lose shaft lean. I'm not going to lose compression, right? If I have shaft lean and then I release that out in front, that's going to allow you to compress the ball easier. All right. All right. We'll go ahead and wrap it up right there. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. I'll be back here tomorrow, Tuesday. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to y'all next time.